Welcome back to the Calm 3533 video lecture for week 1 PR advertising and brand management. We are moving into Megadeth speed round, time sensitivity issues and all that, the usual jazz, but we just want to get to as many questions as possible from the week 1 readings, looking at Arthur East Berger, Ads, Fads, and Communiculture, as well as Robin Blakesman's integrated marketing communication, whatever that is. And so let's look at some questions from Ezel. Ezel, we love the questions, always bringing unique approaches here. Looking at Berger, Chapter 1, Advertising in American Society, Berger talks about how advertising works, quote, from Berger, the advertising agencies argue that they have very little impact on people, end quote. What does Berger mean here when he makes such an assertion? And I went to say that advertising has very little impact on people, and I think something to recognize is that advertising represents the business of strategic risk. All right, it works a lot like the stock market. Okay, there's strategic risk. There's, if everyone knew of a sure thing, then everyone would put their money in it and we'd all be rich and we'd all have everything we wanted. But it just doesn't work that way. And the market is volatile. Consumers are volatile. Consumers can become fickle and so on. And so advertising represents a strategic risk for companies, for businesses. But the payoff, it can yield incredible results. All right, so this is that lightning in a bottle theory, right? It is both advertising can be for businesses both a waste and yet completely necessary. So it can be either or, both and. Right? It is completely necessary to advertise, or you never get your message out there to build a consumer base and grow. But at the same time, if you're advertising wrong, if you're just throwing money or not identifying with the right consumer audience, then it's a waste of advertising money. All right, or even if you're doing too little of it. So those theories go, you are not investing wisely. You're not reaching the right people. Okay. In detail, give ways of how advertising works for you. Who would you target? Classic, right? Baiting the professor. Ego. Let's go with your personal preferences here. Let me just say the first thing that came to my mind was that on that topic, on that response, was this old episode of the Saved by the Bell, and Zach Morris learns about subliminal advertising in one of his classes, of course, and in a high school class, right? And he then practices it, and just like the show itself, it becomes a kind of a fantasy narrative for him, right? He's convincing teachers to give him A's. He's convincing ladies to go on dates with him or something like that, right? People will do his bidding and so on, right? A very, very, very adolescent male fantasy type stuff. So I'm sure that reminds me of something about ads, right? This reminds me of the things that I don't need but could want if I could afford, all right? Or maybe even if I can't afford them. Great question, one of many, about tying in Saussure and that Berger's Chapter 8 on print advertising in America. All right, so that we get two contrasting examples of essentially the semantic triangle, right? Of which I've kind of drawn an example. I'm going to shorthand it for you guys, right? So the semantic triangle, it was a question about signs and symbols, and so ultimately when we're looking at it, you have signs. If we think about it in terms of a triangle, right, visualize it, it may help. But if we have signs right on one end of the triangle, what's called The book has additional definitions, sub-definitions, a signifier on the second side of the triangle, and then the signified, all right, on the third side. Collectively, all three of these things, the sign, the signifier, and the signified, they create a semantic triangle with which the actual object is represented. Now, we've teased this idea of a future course where we go full steam ahead into semiotics, but we're not quite there yet. So I'll table that. But I will say this on that line of thinking. This is one reason. Well, follow-up question rather. Let me read it first. How do signs generate meaning to people? Because we're talking about signs here. Persuade them to buy one's product or one's service. Please explain. Right? Thank you, Ezel. Hopefully, we will, or you all rather, will be engaging and answering these questions on a regular basis, breaking down those points and particles with our weekly eye care analysis. All right, so our eye care analyses help us get into the rhythm of deconstructing signs and symbols, right, and being able to extrapolate their meaning. Question about Robin Blakeman's Chapter 1 of Integrated Marketing Communication. Chapter 1, Blakeman talks about the root of IMC. We're going to use that for short. IMC, before computers existed, how were people marketing their product and how big was their audience? All of this depends, right? Depends on the people, depends on the product. Could be tougher for some people to advertise, could be easier for others to advertise. We know newspaper and magazines, Chapter 9 on newspaper advertising, are still big business. Some. Can one today have to be careful of how and what they advertise to the public in magazines and newspapers? Sure. But first of all, to back up, many of even our elite newspapers, national news, are what we call operating in the red, meaning they are operating at a deficit. They are losing money, but the large majority of our major newspapers are part of some larger media conglomerate, okay, or corporate conglomerate, meaning they're part of a much larger industry. So the industry is willing to take on that negative cost to run the newspaper in exchange for the sort of cultural value and arguably the public persuasion that such a wing of information can represent. But in terms of magazines and newspapers, subscriptions have plummeted in recent years across the board. Really, they have. And for there was a middle years period where we were all pretending like that wasn't happening, but they continue to plummet. Right, print sales, and the bottom line is, for a print form of any kind to survive, to maintain, you need to know your audience and you need to market to these niche focus groups. Okay, so the niche group is going to help you get there. Questions from Kimberly as we spin the wheel right in the market round. Do you agree with, looking back at Berger, do you agree with Max Weber in saying that, quote, wealth was to be an indicator of God's blessing, end quote? If so, what would be your argument for Christians struggling with their finances, right? So if wealth is an indicator of God's blessing, well, then why are so many people struggling? Well, this is, first of all, Weber's drawing from vintage philosophy of Puritanism, right? Sort of some egalitarian principles about that labor, that toiling and hard labor function as a kind of worship, and that there was a certain amount of blessing that comes with that. There's something to that, but at the same time, there was also something. Became these ingrained philosophies about maybe material wealth, or I guess to use theological term, earthly wealth, right? Earthly blessings would flow right forth, if and that would somehow represent that a person's faith was stronger or something along those lines. And we can find plenty of people contesting that, of course, on both sides of the aisle, if we want to continue that phrasing. But in terms of that follow-up question about, Christians struggling with their finances, I recall, and I'm going to paraphrase slightly, that for all have come and fall short of the glory of God. Right? This was something that was sort of ringing in my head when I read that. Christian does not equal spoiler alert, perfect living, okay, in that kind of way. And so, or necessarily like perfected, wise financial decision making, okay? So there's no guarantees, just like there's no guarantees in life that we all have a happy, healthy family, right? All of these kinds of things. And, the same can be cross-applied to certain, really to extend it across numerous religious belief sets, that they're not given certain guarantees beyond what you can gain or maintain through faith, right? Okay. In regards to so many of you, I love that you all were commenting on the Fiji analysis chapter. This is a vintage model. It's an excellent old essay, and sometimes the older they are, first of all, the more they may, if they have the magic, right, then they maintain their brilliance. But then sometimes, despite being brilliant, they still open themselves up for rich critique, which is good. It's good for us to hold the feet to the fire of sometimes aged theoretical arguments. A little, but let's pause that for now. With the market for advertisements changing because of consumer culture changing as a result of technology, do you think that this new system is better because it is controlled by the consumers? And I would pause and say, is it? Is it controlled by the consumer, or is it more negotiated than ever? Right? So perhaps even when we feel like we have increasing amounts of control, and usually it's someone in the media telling us we have more control, but even when we have increasing amounts of control, it's a negotiated control, right? Someone is still out there producing things. Someone is still out there. In one of our recent media studies classes, we talked about framing model, right? In media culture, social influence, we get some exposure there. Not just frame theory, but thinking about how if you are only given certain things to think about, then you're naturally going to pull from that pool to inform sort of the decisions we make, especially as consumers, right? Okay, question real quick from William. Ads, bads, consumer culture question. No. Is it have sexual images blown up the way people are attracted to certain products? And there might be some sort of word discrepancy here. A couple of these questions, want to make sure I'm interpreting them accurately as they're intended. So double check that and let me know if I'm off there. But if the question is asking if sex sells, then yes, right? Then yes, we do become attracted to certain products, right? Or the idea of a product based on how it's presented to us, right? And sort of as highly stylized, aesthetic, even through sort of human agents that themselves are attractive. That can there is a transference process, right? You see beautiful people doing things, you think, oh wow, beautiful people, I like that, that's positive, right? Happy chemicals moving around in my head, and then we start to transfer that over to the object itself, the thing, right? The produced brand image idea Okay, so all of a sudden, I thought nothing of taking a cruise before, and now cruises must be the secret utopia I've been searching for. All right, so this has been excellent. Hope to continue this discussion in some form or fashion, a part 3 of sorts. In the meantime, this is Dr. Gasbury sending us off. Hope to be in touch soon. Thank you.